I'm part of a local workout group in my area that only meets outdoors. They have all kinds of workouts every day of the week, including bodyweight workouts, some with weights, and my personal favorite, running. On this particular day, the group met at a local park to do trail running. It's exactly what it sounds like, running on the trails. Now that you have the general layout, let's get on with my story. The normal time these workouts meet is from 5:30 a.m. to 6:15 a.m. But sometimes I enjoy getting out to the trails a little early and doing what we like to call a pre-party before everyone else arrives. So I arrived at the gravel parking lot at 4:45 a.m. and put all my running gear on. I turned on my headlamp and started off. I remember it was a cool spring morning, and the sun hadn't begun to rise yet. I made a left, went past the pavilion, and then started my ascent up Sunrise Hill. Usually, from the parking lot, this takes about 5 to 10 minutes, depending on your pace. Once I crested the hill, I decided I'd do the mile loop through the woods and then head back to the parking lot, as that would probably be close to the same time when the other men would be arriving for the main workout. I ran down Sunrise Hill and started my trek through the woods. I remember the ground being very muddy, as it had just rained the day before, which always adds to the fun of trail running. I ran this route hundreds of times in the dark by myself and never had any unease with it. But as I rounded the backside of the loop on this day, I began to feel as though something was off. Considering I was halfway through, I decided the best course of action was to push through to make it back to Sunrise Hill. As I continued to run the full duration of the loop, the sense of unease kept growing inside of me, like something was seriously wrong. I surveyed my surroundings to see if I could spot what was causing this feeling, but my eyes were met with empty woods all around. I decided to pick up my pace a bit and try to get out of the woods as soon as possible. As I rounded the final bend of the trail that would lead me back out of the woods and to the top of the hill, the feeling of unease hit an all-time high, and I could feel the hairs on my arms begin to stand up. I took one more glimpse to my right just in time to spot a man walking through the woods. To understand how scary this situation was, you have to understand the section I was at on the trail. If you went to the right of the trail, it's dense brush and a steep incline. So to see a man with no headlamp, no backpack, no running or hiking gear at all, walking up the side of a hill off the trail in the woods at 5:15 a.m. was quite the spook. I didn't even stop to see what he was doing. I just took off as fast as I could. I quickly exited the woods and ran to the top of Sunrise Hill. I stood on top of the hill for a brief moment to see if anyone was pursuing me out of the trail, but no one ever came. The area I live in is very well known for American Civil War history, so there's a high possibility I could have seen a ghost from days past. While I can't be sure what I saw, I know one thing for a fact. I won't be doing any more solo pre-parties on trails for a while. And if you're ever having a gut instinct, you should probably listen to it. When I was in high school, I was an ambassador for a hammock company. I would buy a hammock from them, and in return, they would give me a code to share with my friends and followers so that I could earn money from them. So part of my attempt to make money involved making ads out in the woods with the hammock I purchased. For this particular ad, I was planning on meeting my friend John out on a trail on the Natchez Trace Parkway in Tennessee. On my way there, I told John that the exit where the trail was located was the second exit once you got on the trace. However, when I arrived, I realized that it was the first exit, not the second. So I picked up my phone only to realize I had no service. The trace is notorious for having no reception. To give some perspective, this particular stop on the trace had two sections. There was a top section where the trailhead and bathrooms were located. Then there was a bottom section that was a parking lot, with a few picnic tables by a small creek. When I arrived here, I was the only one at the top section, but in the bottom section, there was a strange half-motorcycle, half-backside of an old Volkswagen Beetle contraption parked in one of the spots. There was also a shirtless man wearing cargo shorts and flip-flops standing next to it. Upon seeing me enter the stop, he began walking up towards the top section. Now, back to the no cell service part. After trying to get a text to send out to John, I decided I'd drive back down the trace until I got service again. So I left the stop, as the man was about 100 feet from my car, and drove back a bit until I regained service. I sent a quick text to John and then headed back to the stop. When I arrived back at the stop, the man from before was up by the side of the trace, standing by the road. As I drove by, he made no effort to try and flag me down. So I drove right past him and down to the bottom section. John had responded and said he'd be another 20 minutes. So I decided to go down to the creek and get some B-roll shots to use in the ad. I tried to park as far away from the man's motorcycle Beetle as I could so he wouldn't get the impression I wanted to talk to him. But as I got out of the car, I noticed the man begin to walk back down from the road towards the lower section. I ignored him and began shooting some footage of the creek. After about 10 minutes of doing that, I looked up, expecting to see the man standing by his vehicle. But to my surprise, I didn't see him anywhere. I looked at the upper section and all around me, but he was nowhere to be found. I went back to my filming until a few minutes later, I began hearing twigs snap in the woods to my left. I looked up and surveyed the woods but saw no sign of movement. As someone who has a definite flight response, I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck stand up as I started to get this feeling that something wasn't right. I tried to brush it off and keep filming, but after hearing a few more footsteps coming from that direction, I made the decision to leave. I got back into my car and drove back up to the upper section, where I could have a full view of the lower section. No sooner than when I parked in front of the bathrooms, here came that man, slowly walking out of the woods right next to where I was filming in the creek. He walked all the way back up to the upper section and into the bathroom. He must have thought I was going to go in there or something, but now I 100% wasn't. Just a few minutes after that, John showed up. I got out of the car and told him what was happening. We stood outside and talked loudly for a few minutes before the man came back out of the bathroom, walked down to his vehicle, and drove off. I can't tell if I was just being a paranoid teen or if this man was really stalking me from the trees, but his behavior was quite strange. It would also be good to mention that I am a male, and at that time, I was 6 feet 6 inches tall, probably 210 pounds. So it's not like I was an easy target. But maybe he saw my expensive camera gear and thought of it as something he could steal. Either way, I'm just glad John got there when he did. To give you some context, I am a 28-year-old male, about 5'8", and weigh around 200 pounds. I'm not in the greatest of shape, and that will be very important later on. As a child, I remember my father being very into the outdoors. He would always take my brothers and me camping or hiking on the weekends. But as I moved out and into my adult life, the allure of the outdoors slowly faded away as my life became a monotonous cycle of 9 to 5 work, followed by drunken weekends with college buddies. All right. That's enough context to get to where I am currently. Last month, my father tragically passed away, and as I sat there at his funeral, I made a promise to myself that I would start attempting to do outdoorsy things as a way to honor my late father. So the week after his passing, I decided it was time to follow through on that promise. I made a plan to leave straight from work on Friday and go to a local state park I've been driving past for years. I read about it briefly online and learned that there are 2 trails in it, a simple 1 mile out and back that goes to a lake, and a 5-mile loop that borders the lake. This being my first hike in a long time, I figured I'd best opt for the 1-mile trail and see how it feels. So, with the plan in place, at 5 o'clock sharp, I got up from my desk and walked out to my car. The park was about 30 minutes from the office, so I figured by the time I got there, I'd have about an hour of daylight before sunset. When I arrived at the park, there were 4 other cars in the parking lot. I took comfort in knowing that I wasn't going to be the only one out here. After parking my car and pulling out my old-school backpack filled with things I thought were necessary, I referenced the trail map to make sure I was following the proper trail and set off. As I walked through the nicely kept trail, I was enamored by the serenity of the surroundings, the chirping of the bugs, the wind rustling through the leaves. It all harmoniously strung together to create a peaceful soundtrack. After about 20 minutes of walking, I found myself at the end of the 1-mile trail where the overlook stood. A younger couple stood at the edge, looking out over the gorgeous sunset that was beginning to form. Bright hues of orange and red lit up the clouds as the sun slowly dipped below the horizon. I sat on a bench, not wanting to crowd the couple's space, and admired the scene before me. As I sat there watching the sunset, a wave of emotion rushed over me as I began to think about the whole reason I was out here in the first place. I remembered all the times my father took me out on hikes just like this and kicked myself for not taking him up on the opportunity when he asked me to go numerous times. As the sky grew darker, the younger couple left to head back down the trail, leaving me alone to wallow in my own sadness. I stood up and watched the sunset for a while longer, until a horrible realization occurred to me. I hadn't planned on being out here past sunset, and as such, I had forgotten to bring a flashlight. I frantically fumbled through my bag, hoping I was smart enough to pack one. But alas, I thought the Rice Krispie treats sitting on my kitchen counter were of far more importance. It had just become twilight, and I thought to myself, if I head back now, there should be enough light to get back to my car with no problem. I started back down the trail at a slightly faster pace than before, with nothing but the fleeting light to guide me. After what I assumed to be another 20 minutes, I started to become very concerned that I might have missed the turnoff for the 1-mile trail and had accidentally begun down the 5-mile loop. I stopped to look around and confirm my suspicion. As I looked to the right, I could still see the moonlight shimmering off the lake, so I once again turned around and headed back in the other direction. After a few minutes, an eerie sound fell over the woods, or should I say the lack of sound. The peaceful noises from earlier seemed to have completely vanished. No crickets chirping, no birds singing, just complete and utter silence. Now, I'm no outdoors expert, but I do remember my father telling me that if the woods ever fall completely silent, it means an apex predator is near. I looked around frantically, trying to see what may be causing the silence. Then I saw it. About 100 yards down the trail, emerging from what I believe to be the spot where the trail splits, was a tall, dark figure. It had to be at least 6'5", and dangling from his hand was some sort of long object, most likely a machete. Although I couldn't see any of its facial features, I could feel the figure looking directly at me. After a few seconds of no movement from either of us, the figure began darting at me. In a fight-or-flight response, I turned and began sprinting into the forest. With it now being completely nighttime, the only light that guided me was the faint glow of the moon. I was tripping over roots and getting smacked in the face by bushes, but the adrenaline inside me kept my legs moving. After what was probably only 20 seconds of running, I came up on a fallen tree that I leaped behind to hide. I fell to the ground as fast as I could and lay there, trying to slow my now heavy breathing. I could hear the tall figure's footsteps approaching as I lay there awaiting my imminent demise. My so-called sprinting only got me about 100 feet off the trail. All I could do was lay there and hope the figure wouldn't be able to see where I had run. After hearing the footsteps get closer and closer, they stopped roughly where I was on the trail. Against my better judgment, I decided to try and get a look at my pursuer. I peeked just the top of my head over to catch a glimpse of what I could now see to be a tall man in a black hoodie and sweatpants, looking in every direction for me, like some sort of ravenous predator. I quickly ducked back down in hopes that he didn't see me. But not more than 5 seconds later, I heard footsteps beginning towards me. My stupid sense of curiosity was really going to get me killed now. With my time to figure out what to do winding down, I had a stroke of genius. I looked around near me and found the biggest rock I could possibly find, and with all the might I could muster without making any extra noise, I hurled the rock into the woods. It sailed past some trees and ended up hitting a few branches before inevitably hitting the ground with a thud. Just as I had hoped, the man took the bait. He took off running towards the sound, and I used that as my chance to run. I figured I was only about 100 yards from the trail I needed to be on. I headed back in the direction I saw the man come from until I did hit the proper trail. From there, I made a beeline back to my car, and that may be the fastest mile I've ever run in my life. Now, thoroughly exhausted and out of breath, I got my keys from my bag as fast as I could and unlocked my car. I threw it into gear and got the heck out of that parking lot. As I took one last glimpse out of my rear view, I noticed that there were no other cars in the parking lot, so I have no idea where this mystery man came from. I debated calling the cops the whole way home, but what was I going to tell them? An estranged man with a machete was running around the park, hunting late-night hikers? I can see the looks of, "You're crazy already." After that, I decided I would honor my father's legacy by only hiking during the day and leave the nights to hanging with my buddies. I'd like to think my father's advice saved my life that night, but I'm still left with so many questions. Where did the man come from? Why was he out there? I guess sometimes it's better to leave those things unanswered. Thanks so much for listening to Nightmare Narratives. If you enjoyed this episode, subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you can be reminded when we post a new video every Tuesday at 10 a.m. Central Time. If you have a story you'd like to hear read on the channel, email it to us at officialnightmarenarratives@gmail.com, and you might just hear your story featured in a future episode. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you next time.